Coming in at number 10 is Aunt May. Although extremely warm and caring, Aunt May in the 616 reality has often been portrayed as a somewhat bland, weak, and incredibly helpless character. Aunt May is constantly having health issues, and she's constantly worrying about Peter Parker because he's such a fragile boy. After half a century of development, the most exciting thing Aunt May has done in The Amazing Spider-Man is almost marrying Dr. Octopus. She's sweet, but I think we can do better. No offense. In the Ultimate Universe, Aunt May gets an overhaul. She's quicker, wittier, and a stronger character overall. When she finally figures out that Peter Parker is Spider-Man, she handles it like anyone would, with disappointment and anger that her closest family member didn't trust her enough to tell her. After a short while, Aunt May finally accepts the fact that her nephew is one of the world's greatest superheroes. After his true identity is revealed, Aunt May becomes someone Peter Parker looks to for advice and ultimately becomes the mother he never had, which is what she should have been. Number 9. Professor X. Professor X in the Ultimate Universe is the most powerful telepath on Earth, possessing vast psionic abilities and was known as one of the most powerful mutants ever. His mutation abilities give him telepathy, astral projection, and this version experiences some telekinetic skills as well, which is different from the 616 version. But honestly, he's here because he is just a little bit morally corrupt. He does things here in the name of the greater good that his 616 self wouldn't dare. There is an obvious example when we look at what happened with Iceman. Bobby was dating a girl at the time when he was inducted into the X-Men. Now this girl had the potential to convince Bobby to leave the X-Men, and Professor X did not like that. He used his powers to erase the memory of Bobby's girlfriend from his mind, just to keep Iceman on the team. He does things like this on the regular, and they often come back to bite him in the butt, which adds a layer to his character and storytelling which I personally find fun to explore. Number 8. Thor. This one may be purely based on the costume over everything else. It was an incredibly power-evoking style change that still called back to the original while trimming the unnecessary extras. But the other interesting thing that this version of Thor brings is a whole question over whether he is in fact a god or not. His full name in the Ultimate Universe is Thorleif Gullman, and he suffered a nervous breakdown before his 30th birthday and began having delusions of Asgard. He was drafted to a project at the Dome that was trying to recreate the super soldier serum that created Captain America, but instead they went the biomechanical route and created a harness that provided the wearer with the abilities of flight, super strength, and limited invulnerability. Now Thorleif Gullman, selected as the test subject, was fitted with the suit, but during the testing process he started ranting about how he now believed he was actually the Norse god of thunder, like actually. For most of the Ultimate series it was on the fence until the very end when it was finally confirmed that he was in fact the real Thor, marooned to Midgard with amnesia thanks to Loki's schemes. It's an interesting take on the character and I think it's kinda cool. I like it. Number 7. Rogue. Similar to her Prime Universe version, Rogue, or Marion Carlisle, drains the life force and absorbs the memories and abilities of others through skin-to-skin contact, with the caveat being that she can end someone's life if she holds on too long. In the Ultimate Universe, Rogue actually gets picked up by the Weapon X program and is trained to use her abilities as an assassin. In the Prime Universe, it turns out using her powers on a mutant to the point of ending their life will actually permanently transfer these powers over to Rogue. This happened twice. First time was with Gambit. She drained his life force when he was already near the end after a fight with the mutant Juggernaut, and she gained his kinetic energy manipulation abilities plus, sometimes, his accent. The second time she did this, she drained the powers of Juggernaut himself when he was near death, gaining his abilities permanently, giving her the strength to throw cars, the durability to withstand demolishing buildings, super speed, and limitless stamina. Seeing Rogue wielding both Gambit's and Juggernaut's powers is strange, and yet very, very awesome. Number 6. Nightcrawler. Much like Rogue, the Ultimate Universe Kurt Wagner was kidnapped from Germany by Weapon X and brutally trained as one of their agents. But none of the brutal mistreatment dampened his spirits. He still remained true to his faith and even stopped Storm from killing the Weapon X commander. He was decidedly more serious than his main universe counterpart, and while some may not like that, I think it works here. I don't know. He struggled with his obvious physical differences, which made him lonely to the point of kidnapping Dazzler to manipulate her into falling in love with him. That part's not so great, but he did overcome his homophobia to be able to accept Colossus, which wins him a whole bunch of points. Also, his costume and overall look was just way better in my opinion, I don't know.
Number 5. Ultimate Modi. When it comes to the ultimate reality, there are so many amazing characters that deserve more time in the spotlight. One of them is the son of Thor and Hela. Now, before you freak out, a friendly reminder that in the comics, Hela is not Thor's sister, but is his niece. And before you freak out from that revelation, a friendly reminder that in the Ultimate Comics line, Hela's origins are simply that she is basically death personified. So, no direct relation to Thor that we know of, although there is something pretty creepy to be said about their relationship, other than the fact that Thor was manipulated into sleeping with Hela in exchange for basically helping his love Valkyrie. She's had her eyes on him ever since he was really young, which is disturbing. But I guess if, she's death personified, at any point in his life this becomes creepy because, by comparison she's very ancient. Modi is their son together, and he is interesting in the sense that he likely served somewhat as an inspiration for the MCU version of Loki. Thor even at one point in the comics mistakes him for Loki, not recognizing his son now that he is all grown up, after having left him in the World Tree to basically grow up alone, for Modi's own protection. But of course, Modi wasn't really fixated on that part of the whole leaving him alone to grow up. Modi is interesting because he never really seems to have had a close connection with either of his parents, and we see him probably do the most bonding with his uncle Loki. This might also be why he ends up as more of a villain in the story, although his mom is also Hela, so that may have also had an influence on him. Number 4. Photon. Monica Rambeau is, I feel like, just beginning to get some of her due in modern comics. She recently got her own series titled Photon, and we are finally going to see her on the big screen when she appears in the Marvels, which will be about Miss Marvel, Captain Marvel, and of course, Monica Rambeau, who I imagine will be known as well in the MCU as Photon. I feel like Monica is a character who has been snubbed consistently throughout her history. She was the first female Captain Marvel who was forced to give up the name when Marvel's son, Genisvel, wanted to use the name for himself, which I mean, I guess he is Captain Marvel's son, but still. She was also at one point a leader of the Avengers team, but was pretty quickly nerfed after a team-up attack with Thor backfired, leaving her weak and on the mend. She was then manipulated by the evil Dr. Druid into giving up her place as team leader. Monica is an amazingly powerful character who also really has a strong sense of right and wrong. She is a fantastic character who also has such a rich history and origin, working for the New Orleans Harbor Patrol initially as a lieutenant before a freak accident that happened on duty resulted in her getting powers. Number 3. Quasar. I might be the only one who misses Quasar, but lately, I don't know, I've just been thinking about him a lot, and he is most definitely a character who I think does not get enough love, especially currently in the modern comics. I was even looking up Quasar the other day, and I could only find a recent appearance of him from about 2 years ago in Guardians of the Galaxy. That has been too long, in my opinion. I first fell in love with the character of Wendell Vaughn in the Dazzler series, where he was introduced to me through Project Pegasus, being really one of the few friends Dazzler had after she was intercepted by them and volunteered herself, and her powers for further study. Eventually, Dazzler would try to leave the facility without being dismissed, becoming suspicious of the scientific minds that were holding her there and basically resentful of them. During her escape, she would accidentally use her powers to seemingly kill the villain Ulysses Klaue, who was also being held for study. Through this, Wendell would remain a friend of Dazzler and would even come to testify at her trial when she was forced to face the music and was basically sued by Pegasus for the damage done to Project Pegasus and the apparent accidental murder of Klaue, who was in their custody, so yeah. Number 2. Blue Marvel. Blue Marvel is one of those characters that I really think deserves so much more attention. He is just such a powerful and interesting figure, and he does not get enough time to shine in the comics. Blue Marvel is Adam Brashear, known for being super smart, super powerful, and kind of super old. Although he doesn't look like it, thanks to his superpowers of course. Blue Marvel was actually retconned to have been a hero way back in the 60s. He became a hero after the negative reactor experiment he was working on went wrong. He and his scientific team were hoping to bridge the gap between the negative zone and the physical plane in a hope to harness basically antimatter energy. However, the reactor during a test exploded. Did it explode or did it implode? It did one of those things. And combined with Adam, turning him into a living, breathing negative reactor. I don't think he actually has to breathe though, but the fact remains that he became in essence a superhero as a result of this explosion or implosion. He would go on to fight crime in the US, but would basically quickly be asked to step down by the president after being celebrated for his accomplishments thus far, as a result of the intense racial tension in the country at the time. He's got a fascinating past and is an extremely interesting and powerful character, in essence having powers to rival those of basically DC's Superman. So why we don't talk about him more, I don't know. Maybe he's too powerful. Is that the problem? Number 1. Dazzler. For those who are new to the channel, I love Dazzler. And for those of you who have been around for a while, I'm sure Daz taking my top spot comes as a surprise to basically no one. I personally am generally a big fan of the characters who are less well known and seem to kind of just like fly under the radar. I think it's because I've always felt some kinship with them, because although they are great and amazing, they might not be as popular or as celebrated among like all fans. In a way, I think this reflects the way that I kind of see myself. Like, I'm pretty cool, but I also feel like because I enjoy celebrating kind of like my little quirks, I'll never really be someone who is mainstream popular, because I don't necessarily like fit into neat boxes. Dazzler's also one of those characters. With someone like Dazzler, it's kind of the same thing that she has going on, both on the page to readers and I would say in canon in her own life. Dazzler is a mutant, but she's never really been super passionate about using her powers like so many others to be your typical hero. Instead, she's more interested in using her powers to entertain and bring joy to people through the power of her music and her live performances. She's like one of those, you know, just everyday heroes. She's like, I just want to entertain people and do that, and in that way she's heroic, and then she gets pulled into stuff and she's still like, oh dang, I need to like figure this out now, and she always thinks through it, I feel like a real person would. Number 10. Maximus the Mad. I just like the look of Maximus the Mad here. We don't get to see too much of him or the other Inhumans, but what I like about him and them is kind of just that. They're more alluring when they're kept mysterious. Maximus, in case you didn't know, is the brother to Black Bolt. In the Earth 616 universe, he is known as Maximus the Mad, as I believe he's also known here. He is often depicted as such in terms of his appearance in the 616 continuity, and is also made to look somewhat more flamboyant in comparison to his Earth 1610, his Ultimate Universe counterpart. I do love that Maximus just looks like a normal dude in the Ultimate Universe, because also I just feel like just because you're mad doesn't mean you look different, you know what I mean? You just look normal. I think that actually makes him more frightening to me as well, that he just looks so normal, so average. Especially among the rest of the Inhumans, who all look pretty freaky, stand out, and honestly somewhat monstrous here. This more bleak take on the whole group in the Ultimate Universe makes me want to see a film version of them that was more of like a supernatural horror. Especially considering they consider Adelan to actually be like a heaven here, yet it's so dark. I believe based on this depiction, there could be promise in something like a supernatural horror film version of them. Number 9. Gregory Stark. Sorry Arno, move over, Gregory is here. I like Arno Stark, okay, but Gregory was a pretty cool villain to have, and he wasn't the secret brother of Iron Man either. Gregory is actually not just known, he's often more well liked than Tony is in the Ultimate Universe, at least initially. Tony is seen as being a bit of a loose cannon in comparison to his older twin brother you see, who constantly has things way more together and is also super wicked smart. But that also works well for Gregory's character, as he also turns out to be, you guessed it, a bad guy. Of course, no one can be that good. We should have known. Gregory manipulated S.H.I.E.L.D. in order to get full control of it, and when all the pieces were in play, basically attempted to take over the world. He had to be taken out by Tony Stark, but in a much more permanent way than Tony when he dealt with Arno in the Earth 616 reality. Tony, in part, actually helped to kill his brother. He used an EMP to disrupt his nanites, which made Gregory critically vulnerable to an attack from Thor. Ouch. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list, be sure to head on over to Facebook to show us some love, where you can give us a follow, a like, and check out all the cool content we have over there. Number 8. Crystal. I really love the original Crystal, especially in terms of her appearance, but I also do love the super rebellious vibes we get from Earth 1610 Ultimate Crystal in this narrative. Here, Crystal is still the little sister of Medusa, but this group of Inhumans, Medusa included, are even less likely to mingle with humans. They simply want to live a completely separate and simple life, which bothers Crystal, who it seems is searching for something more, something outside of her own family. Acting out, she runs away from her people, not eager to play the loyal member of the royal court, and not fond of her fiance, Black Bolt's brother, Maximus the Mad. yeah, they're engaged in this reality. She runs into the Fantastic Four and in so doing kind of reveals to them the secret location of Adelan as they pursue her after she is retrieved by her people. Crystal ends up deciding to stay with the Inhumans too, despite her unhappiness, which I also think is an interesting choice, and it gets me wanting to know more about both Crystal and the Inhumans in this universe. Cause like the Fantastic Four were also just like, you come chill with us, but she's like, nah, this is how it's gotta be. Even though I definitely was not super here for this, but I still gotta stick with my fam. Number 7. Nick Fury. The Nick Fury of the Ultimate Universe Earth 1610 isn't perfect. In fact, he can kinda seem like he's being a butt a lot of the time, but in reality it's just that Nick Fury often doesn't trust people. He keeps his plans and reasons behind them close to his chest, and while you might not understand them and therefore think he's callous, he's often just trying to make the hard call. Nick Fury has some flaws, I'll grant you, especially if we're talking about his relationship with his ex-wife and everything that apparently went wrong there. But this version of the character would become so beloved that he actually go on to inspire an Earth 616 counterpart in Nick Fury Jr., and of course would inspire the version of the character we saw up on the big screen in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, where he was portrayed by the one and only Samuel L. Jackson. Samuel L. Jackson in fact also served as inspiration for the 1610 counterpart in the comics when it came to his appearance, and Mr. Jackson was actually the character's first pick, of course, when asked in canon who would be best to portray him in a film. Number 6. Black Bolt. Black Bolt is already menacing over on Earth 616, at least I would say in modern comics he is, but on Earth 1610 he is really menacing. We see Black Bolt for an even shorter time than Crystal, but honestly it only adds to the mystery of the character, making him appear more intimidating. The colors by June Chung during his appearance in Ultimate Fantastic Four Annual Issue Number 1 really help the character to pop as well, and the pencils by Jay Lee also add to the presence of his appearance. He might not say much, but he really doesn't need to here. This is a very muscular, dark, and yet blindingly bright Black Bolt with the white lines of his costume reminding me of lightning. Black Bolt simply appears basically to destroy Adelan so they might find a new secret home, as their current one in the Himalayas has been revealed to the FF, and you know, it's supposed to be secret. Aside from that, he also communicates how disappointed he is in Crystal. Honestly, I would not want this Black Bolt to be disappointed in me. I would be like walking on eggshells with him if he was like, I'm slightly disappointed in you, Amanda. Or you know, just stared at me and looked disappointed, because he couldn't really say that. He can only shout, well, he does shout to destroy Adelan, basically that he's disappointed, so there you go. Even the rebellious Crystal seems to be affected by Black Bolt's guilt tripping though, agreeing to remain with her people despite being offered a place among the humans and the Fantastic Four. I mean, he doesn't even shout to destroy Adelan. What am I saying? He like just says a word. That's also how powerful this version of him is. He's like, I'll just say a word, Crystal, your disappointment, and then it all just wipes away. Number 5. Helena Wayne. While Helena Wayne might not even exist in the main continuity, at least not yet, although she's definitely been there before, that hasn't held her back from being one of the most extraordinary and capable Bat family members from the multiverse. On Earth 2, or one of the Earth 2s, because there's kind of 2 Earth 2s, Helena ends up taking up the mantle of her father, becoming the new Batman. She wears colors similar to Batwoman, red and black, but decides to keep the mantle as is, as opposed to changing it to match her own gender identity. Helena lives up to the name too, and while we don't get to see too much of her in terms of her capability, just knowing Helena Wayne from the comics and from both Earth 2s, I can imagine she would not only do her father proud, but also potentially end up surpassing him in terms of her capabilities, having learned herself from the best. This version of Helena also trained under Bruce as his Robin and was there with him when he died, doing her best to defend her father before the building that he was in exploded. Number 4. Dick Grayson. Dick Grayson was Batman's first Robin and would end up taking up the mantle of Batman after Bruce Wayne's supposed death at the hands of Darkseid. In reality, Batman wasn't dead, but had simply kind of been blasted through time. Dick did such a good job with the mantle that even when Batman was revealed to have survived the events of Final Crisis and he returned, he actually didn't make Dick hang up the cape and cowl. Instead, in the one-shot Batman The Return, Bruce asks Dick to stay on and operate as Batman in Gotham in his stead, while he heads out to manage Batman Incorporated, which was pretty cool. I feel like you know you did a good job as Batman when you get the stamp of approval from Bruce, which is definitely what Dick got as Batman and what Damian got working as Grayson's Robin. And you definitely are considered to be trusted when Bruce gives you Gotham to look after, which is definitely the city closest to his own heart. Number 3. Superman. When Superman ended up swapping powers or lack thereof with Batman in 2003's Superman/Batman, Superman proved to be the one who was better. Batman, with Superman's powers, ended up kinda losing his grip on reality. He believed that he could hear his parents' voices and became super violent in his fight for justice. The other heroes of Earth attempted to convince Batman to swap back his powers with Clark and let him help them, but he refused. In the end, it was up to Superman as Batman to stop him, which, even without powers, he did. He ended up luring him back to Earth and employing the help of fellow colleague, friend, and hero Zatanna. While Zatanna is the one behind luring Batman to Earth with illusions of his parents and is the one who reverses the swap, in the end, even Bruce admits that Superman did a great job as him, suggesting that the swap was about more than powers, as Superman behaved and acted just as Bruce would have in his position, and did whatever it took, putting himself in danger to ensure the world was safe. Number 2. Batman 1,000,000. Batman 1,000,000 is of course from the future, way in the future. He hails from the alternate future known as DC 1,000,000, coming from year 85,300. That's right, 85,300. What a year. There he guards the galaxy's most dangerous criminals who are held within a prison on Pluto. This Batman's identity is unknown to us, but we do know a bit of his backstory. He was one of the thousands of victims who was forced as a kid to watch the death of his parents at the hands of villain Zaron, while others were driven to madness or took their own life. This hero instead was inspired to make sure an act like this never happened again, taking up the mantle of Batman. Batman 1,000,000, being from the future, has a unique physiology which grants him superhuman abilities such as telepathy. He also has future tech, and off-the-charts IQ of over 1,000, not actually possible if you know how IQs work, and was one of the heroes who helped to save the Earth from the traitor Starman and the plague that he had unleashed. Number 1. Terry McGinnis. What would this list be without Terry McGinnis? As Batman's direct protege in the future, Terry definitely deserves our number 1 spot, I think. He also was designed to be the next Batman, and so not only has the training and experience needed, learning from an older and wiser Bruce Wayne himself, but also genetically was made to become the best Batman possible. In fact, you could even argue, because he grew up with his parents still alive, that he might be a more whole Batman. Terry was the product of Project Batman Beyond, headed by Amanda Waller, who actually snuck Bruce Wayne's DNA into his conception with nanotech that would basically rewrite Terry's dad's genetic code to match Bruce's, making Terry, in a weird way, kinda Bruce's son / half-clone. Waller hired Phantasm, aka Andrea Beaumont, to then kill Terry's parents after they left the movie theater with their son, trying to also orchestrate the same origin story for Terry to help motivate him to become a hero. However, in the end, Andrea refused to go through with it, and so Terry got to live his life with his parents, alive. Although it should be noted, his parents did end up getting divorced, giving Terry a different kind of struggle in life. Also, although his father wouldn't end up being assassinated by Beaumont at that time, he would later on die tragically, so still has tragedy in his past. He's a hero. All heroes, I feel like, have tragedy in their past at some point.
Coming in at number 10, it's photographic reflexes. This superhero power is usually attributed to one character. At least in Marvel Comics, that character would be Tony Masters, otherwise known as Taskmaster. Taskmaster's photographic reflexes ability allows this guy to watch another person's physical movements and duplicate them without any practice or training, no matter how complex those movements are. Tony is able to duplicate almost any physical activity after seeing it done by someone else only once, even using this ability to master complex gymnastics routines and play difficult pieces of music. But it goes beyond mere mimicry. He has often shown the ability to actually predict an opponent's next move before they even make it if he has studied their fighting style enough. Opponents who are skilled at improvisational fighting styles, or who have a more random, unpredictable style, are less likely to have their moves predicted by Taskmaster, though of course. Another benefit that comes with his photographic reflexes is that Tony can push his body past its natural limits, meaning his agility and speed can increase itself to match that of other superhuman speed and agility. It also makes him an excellent teacher, so pop that on the resume. Number 9. Dimensional storage. While this kind of power is more often just used as a trope in television and comic books where characters pull objects from seemingly out of nowhere, it has also been used as an actual legit power, and it's all a result of spatial spatial manipulation and/or dimensional travel. We have seen this ability used by all sorts of characters, from the wizards of Harry Potter with their tents, buildings, or bags, to characters like Ramona Flowers from Scott Pilgrim, who pulled a massive hammer out of a tiny little purse. In DC Comics, Green Lanterns store their lantern batteries in a pocket dimension from which they recall it when they need to recharge their rings. From Marvel, the mutant Abyss houses a portal to an unknown dimension that he can freely pull objects in and out of. The Spider-Man villain Spot is basically composed of holes that go to a pocket dimension. Deadpool has been known to use this trick from time to time, although it's hardly ever explained because it's Deadpool. Then, of course, most characters with cartoon physics do this too. These pocketed dimensions are not limited to any physical location and can be applied pretty much anywhere. Whether it's a portable bag, a pants pocket, a closet, or with a character like the X-Men's Dupe, it's literally inside of him. A hero with this ability can basically store anything, even people, so long as whatever it is fits the entry point. There's no need to worry about the weight of the objects in storage either, as it's floating in an unlimited space or it's on a massive world-sized dimension, eliminating the strain that comes with carrying it. I think this is pretty awesome. Number 8. Cypher. Cypher has what some people believe to be a pretty horrible mutant ability, especially when it comes to combat. Personally, I would kill to be able to subconsciously translate any written or spoken language, human or alien. He can also subconsciously understand body language and intention, as well as decipher codes and computer languages. After he was resurrected, and also so Marvel could make him actually useful, everything that he sees is interpreted into language, basically making him able to read life. I don't even know if that makes sense. Everything I just said is strange enough, but I can wrap my head around it to some degree. Sort of. Then, you tell me that this man can, quote, speak in binary code. In New Mutants Volume 3, number 14, a guy operating a mech comes upon Cypher during a battle, and this mutant speaks to the mech saying, "Hello, you don't have to do this. You know, I can set you free, show you how to think for yourself." And he says it in both English and binary code at somehow the same time. The dude operating the mech understands him since he's speaking English, but for some reason, the mech, which is not artificial intelligence, also understands him, boots the operator out, and begins talking in zeros and ones. I don't even know. Number 7. Darkness Manipulation. Sometimes called Umbra Kinesis or Shadow Manipulation, darkness manipulation is the ability to create and manipulate darkness or shadows. It's basically control over the absence of light, which is a weird thing to think about. What's cool is that usually this darkness is so powerful that it cannot be penetrated by light, and sometimes not even by other energies either. Characters with this power are able to give their own shadows life, and others can generate darkness, which in DC comes from a place called the Shadowlands or the Dark Zone, and in Marvel, certain characters like the hero Cloak access it from the Dark Force dimension. DC's Teen Titan Raven, along with Richard Swift, the Shade, Darklight, and Shadowlass are all capable of doing this. So is the Bat God Barbados, who is able to generate and manipulate dark energy and cloak areas in darkness, and even fire dark lightning from his hands. Dark lightning makes no sense, but just roll with it. The Marvel symbiote god Null possessed the ability to create, control, and manipulate a fount of eldritch darkness, which was a manifestation of the primordial void that existed before the universe itself, quote unquote. That's what he calls the living abyss. With this, he was able to create the symbiotes themselves, including the all-black symbiote, which granted a similar but less powerful version of this power to others like Gore the God Butcher. Jordan Lewis, otherwise known as the mutant Gloom, had the ability to release a nerve-dampening darkness at will, temporarily blinding whoever he chooses. It's just a cool power, man. Number 6. Dazzler. Dazzler, otherwise known as Alison Blair, is a mutant with the ability to transduce sound into light. She is also a very gifted singer and performer, which she uses in tandem with her powers to just blow people's minds at her concerts. But she is more than that. She can take any source of sound other than her own voice, unless it's projected back at her, as light energy, which she stores up and can use in a bunch of really cool ways. Obviously, using the lights she emits, she can blind adversaries, but she can also also create therapeutic light to help allies. Her Dazzle Blast, which is either the best name ever or the worst name ever, is a light show so intense that it overwhelms the nervous systems of whoever is watching it and can knock people out. She can also shoot lasers that can cut through solid metal and photon blasts that strike with concussive force. She can create quote-unquote light fog to hide allies. She can create force fields for offensive and defensive purposes, and she can even fly with this power somehow. She's become the Herald of Galactus in a What If comic, and she was actually one of the more impressive versions of Thor from God Doom's Thor Corps, even coming over to the 616 reality at one point. Dazzler is pretty awesome.
Number 5. Kitty Pryde. Once again, it is hard for me to say that I love the Ultimate Kitty Pryde more than the main continuity Kate Pryde of Earth 616, as I really love her dearly. But I will say that I think Ultimate Kitty Pryde had a lot of awesome stuff to offer, and that while still staying true to the heart of the character, differentiated her enough from her 616 self. And I really appreciate that, especially as a Pryde fan. Kitty in the Ultimate Universe was known for being headstrong and strong-willed. Despite her mom getting a promise from Professor X that Kitty, if enrolled in his school, would not go out on any X missions, Kitty was stubborn and snuck aboard the Blackbird to do so anyways. She would prove herself to be a formidable leader who many mutants looked up to over the years, and for a time would also be a close friend and even romantic partner of Spider-Man. The two would date and fight crime together. It was pretty cute. There is honestly a lot to love about the Ultimate Kitty Pryde. Number 4. Ben Grimm. As opposed to Ben Grimm, the college friend and roommate of Reed Richards, these two became friends when they were little kids and remained close throughout middle school. Just like in the 616 version of this story, Ben Grimm was a strong, athletic type who became the star of the football team, known by the nickname the Grim Reaper. However, it was also at this time that Reed was teased and mistreated a lot in school by other students because of his brilliant and unique mind, which made him stand out. Grimm stood up for Reed though and looked out for him, and in exchange Richards would help Ben with his homework. Eventually Reed would be recruited to working for the Baxter Building at a young age, and the two would be split up until years later when Grimm appeared to be in the Nevada desert near Reed's test area for his end zone experiment. Grimm joined Reed and the rest of his team, including Sue, Johnny, and Victor Van Dam, and witnessed the test, and as a result was changed forever. This version of Ben has a much more solid trajectory of accepting what he's become after he's transformed into the Thing, and although initially Sue and Reed are closer, eventually Reed ends up the odd man out, and Ben and Sue even end up together romantically, with Sue even proposing to Ben. Number 3. Silver Sable. Silver Sable has a somewhat darker origin story, if that's possible, in the Ultimate Universe. Instead of losing her mother and wanting to avenge her death, the young girl was often left to be raised by her mother, who frequently mistreated her. While she didn't know growing up, the truth that her father was absent was that he hunted down former World War II German soldiers, those who did awful things and were considered on the wrong side of the war. While on Earth 616, Silver Sable knew this and begged her father to train her. In the Ultimate Universe of Earth 1610, she didn't know of her father's true line of work until he was on his deathbed. She was brought by his associates to see him one last time, and he told her the truth about his work and apologized for not being there for her. With his dying breath, he said he wished he had had more time to teach her everything he knew. This inspired Silver Sable to follow in his footsteps, becoming a mercenary who used the money from her jobs to fund her own work and becoming the leader of the Wild Pack. Number 2. Betty Ross. In the Ultimate reality, it is Betty Ross and not Jennifer Walters who is She-Hulk. I don't think I prefer Betty's She-Hulk to Jen's She-Hulk per se, but I definitely prefer this version of Betty to the one from the main continuity of Earth 616. In this version of the story, Betty Ross fell for Bruce Banner shortly after college, but a wedge was driven between them when Bruce's work on recreating the super soldier serum and his obsession with testing on himself resulted in him being transformed into the Hulk. However, when director of S.H.I.E.L.D. Nick Fury planned to use Wolverine to hunt down the Hulk and eliminate him, Betty Ross decided she had to do something. While she didn't have the rank or clearance to really interfere with the decision and the mission, and she was unable to convince the other heroes to help her, she took matters into her own hands by stealing a non-rage-inducing version of the Hulk formula made by Jennifer Walters. Betty took this formula herself in pursuit of the Hulk and Wolverine and was transformed into the She-Hulk. Number 1. Colossus. As with many other characters on our list, Colossus of the Ultimate Universe had a much more tragic upbringing than his 616 counterpart. On our 616, Colossus grew up on a collective farm in Russia, spending much of his spare time painting when not working on the farm, a talent he showed great affinity for. However, in the 1610 version of the character's origin, Colossus's Pyotr Rasputin fought in the Cold War, where the secret that he was a mutant was revealed to Anatol Spichkin. Spichkin promised Pyotr work should he ever need, and agreed to keep his secret. In this reality, Colossus's skin turns to steel, but it doesn't really come with super strength, so to work for Anatol he would take a drug known as Banshee to grant himself super strength to go along with his skin's durability. This Colossus is also gay, but spends most of his life in the closet in regards to this. When his father first found out, he was ashamed of Pyotr, and as such Pyotr has struggled most of his life, worried about the secret of his sexual orientation being revealed. His story is uplifting and empowering, and while different, is possibly even better than the 616 narrative for Colossus. Number 10. Ultimate Red Skull. Ultimate Red Skull is not a hero, but hey, guess what? This isn't a superhero list, it's a character list. So it's still super appropriate for me to be including him here. Why do we love him? Because he is a complex villain with an insane backstory and origin. Ultimate Red Skull is called such because he hails from the ultimate reality of Earth 1610, with its own comic line that literally saved Marvel back in the early 2000s, breathing new and fresh lifeblood into the company by getting people excited to read comics again. Many characters as such were changed, as this line was basically free from the normal bogged down 616 continuity, which for some was actually intimidating to dip into because of years and years of previous continuity. I know myself, when I started reading comics, I was also intimidated. Ultimate Red Skull is one of these characters that was completely revamped. In this version of the tale, he is actually Steve Rogers' son, being the son of both Captain America and his fiancée at the time, Gail Richards. After Steven went MIA while on a mission, becoming frozen in the ice, Gail was convinced to give up their baby to the American government for the child's protection, or so she was told. In reality, the US military simply wanted to train the boy to be like his father, hoping to acquire another super soldier after the loss of Rogers. However, this backfired, as the boy became resentful of his absent father and his accomplishments, as well as those who were holding him, and escaped, becoming the villain known as Red Skull. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, and if you love characters that are just underappreciated like I do, be sure to check out our weirdest playlist, because I feel like weird characters are often also that. Number 9. Young Cable. Young Cable! I mean, I love all forms of Cable really, but Young Cable or Kid Cable is definitely one of my favorite versions. And while Cable is back, Young Cable basically swapped out spots with him for this to be so. Kind of breaks my heart, because this happened after I was really beginning to fall in love with the character via Phil Noto and Jerry Dugan's Cable series. I haven't talked about this series in some time, but it truly was one of my favorites from the current X-Men line. And if Young Cable isn't enough to pique your interest, it also has Space Knights and the Stepford Cuckoos peppered throughout as well, and just good old Summers family bonding, which we all enjoy. So there is definitely something in there that I'm sure would draw you in, and then of course, like me, you'll probably also fall in love with the character. This might be a controversial one to include though, considering many were not a fan of the character when he first arrived on the scene, seemingly closing his own time loop by killing his older self, which is, you know, why a lot of fans are not here for Kid Cable. But trust me when I say this series will make you a fan, and like me, will probably also make you miss him, like me wanting to have him back in the comics sooner rather than later, but probably will have to wait for some time. Number 8. Trinary. Trinary is another hero that I love who recently fell by the wayside in the comics, and I was really enjoying reading X-Corp too, which I wanted it to be an ongoing, but it was only a mini. Why'd this happen? The team and series that Trinary was a part of. Shilpa Khatri is a relatively new character over at Marvel who first appeared in 2018 in X-Men Red issue number 1. She is a mutant whose powers allow her to control technology. Although, to hear Trinary explain it, it's less her bending tech to her will and more like her having a conversation with technology and making requests which are happily carried out. In other words, it seems like her technopathy abilities are more like Cypher's when it comes to technology. She can communicate with the tech, and generally they want to help Trinary because they like her. Shilpa initially gained the attention of the X-Men as a mutant when she used her powers to balance some of the wealth in India, taking from 25 of the highest earning CEOs' bank accounts to basically give funds to every single working woman in the country, which I also personally am like, balancing it out, balancing out the money. Number 7. Moon Girl. Moon Girl is ranking a little lower on this list because although I love Luna and I do think that she deserves more time in the spotlight, having recently been declared officially by Marvel as one of their all-time smartest superheroes, she also did just get a new series, and she even got a show on Disney Plus along with her pal Devil Dinosaur. Luna Lafayette is just an inspiring character, and that's why I still think she deserves a place on our list and deserves even more time in the spotlight. Although she is finally coming back into the spotlight now, there was a long time when she was very much out of it. I'm excited though to see her coming back into the mainstream and to get so much attention, and I want to in part thank Marvel Snap possibly for some of what's happening with her now, who also really did her and Devil Dino justice with the cards that they made for both of them in the game. I think both Moon Girl series could even be attracting new readers and viewers thanks to her card in the game, which pairs insanely well with Devil Dinosaur when used correctly. Like, the two of them together in Marvel Snap are really a pretty OP duo. Number 6. Talisman. Talisman is an amazing character, and one, like many Alpha Flight members, that we simply do not get enough of in the comics. She is the daughter of Shaman, Dr. Michael II Youngman, and like many daughters who have come before her and after her in the comics, I feel she has been a little bit snubbed somewhat throughout her history. Like her father, Elizabeth is also a pretty rad character with multiple layers. She has a strained relationship with her father and the death of her mother, which happened when she was young. Both Elizabeth and Michael suffered as a result of her loss, with Elizabeth blaming her father and her father, Michael, also pretty much blaming himself. Despite their strained relationship, however, Elizabeth would eventually reach out to her father, and the mysticism that stretched back through their family history would also be shown to influence her, with her being revealed as the powerful figure Talisman, with her getting much of her power from the coronet, or talisman if you prefer, of power.
Number 5. Living Sand. Sand. Yes, it's coarse and it's rough and it does get everywhere, but sand is just millions of tiny rocks, and as such it can be very strong while also being almost liquid in its composition. Obviously the obvious choice for examples here would be the Spider-Man villain Sandman, who has been a pain in the backside and occasionally an ally to Spider-Man using these abilities. But there's also the mutant Dust from Marvel Comics as well, who can transform herself into an explosive cloud of sand-like silicon, allowing her to reform her body at will or maintain an aerial-based sand form in the shape of her human body. Clayface from DC Comics is even a character that I think sort of falls into this category, but then we aren't really talking about sand anymore. But if we want to talk manga, there's even Gaara from Naruto, and he'll really show you how powerful sand can be. It's actually kind of scary. Sand can crush, blind, bury, dehydrate, drown, and even erode opponents, which is an absolutely terrifying thought. Number 4. Technopathy. Just like the last point, there aren't many characters with this power since it's pretty OP in our modern world. DC's Cyborg and Brainiac, Marvel's Apocalypse, Ultron, or even the mutant Hijack are just a few of the comic book characters who have tapped into the powers of technology, and with it, they were able to bring some of the most powerful heroes and villains to their knees. Technopathy is the ability to psychically perceive and interface with technology, and while the use of the power varies from individual to individual, it allows the user to perceive the location of mechanical devices, physically perceive structure and function of those devices, activate or deactivate power for electronic devices, communicate with and command said electronic devices, and even psychically channel their perception or consciousness through electronic media at will, effectively gaining a sort of pseudo-immortality, just like being a living swarm or being living sand. With the world becoming more and more technologically dependent, this ability just gets more and more useful. Number 3. Forge. Forge has been an important member of the X-Men and mutant community for a long time, but for some reason he always seems kind of unused to me. He's almost like the X-Men's version of Q from James Bond, but not really. His mutant ability is that he is an intuitive genius. He can visually perceive mechanical energy, quote unquote, in action. Like, he can just understand how something works by looking at it, as easily as breathing. This power allows Forge to instinctively know and understand the potential and functional operations of any machine or technology device in his visual range. A skill that, combined with his natural intelligence, allows him to conceive, design, design and build mechanical devices and operate, modify, and disassemble existing technology or create countermeasures for it. It's almost hard to explain how this power is a power, but it is. It's allowed him to subconsciously invent and construct something where someone else would have to actually think about it, design it, and then create it. He's been able to just make it and then deconstruct it later to figure out how to improve it. He's created cybernetic systems, sophisticated holograms, and elaborate computer and fiber optic systems, as well as time travel devices. His potential is vast, and that's before you take his magical affinity into account. Number 2. Stretching. Elasticity and plasticity, the ability to convert the mass of an entire body into a highly malleable state at will, is an ability that has many more applications than you think. This ability is shared by Martian Manhunter using his shapeshifting ability from DC. There's also Plastic Man, and then of course Reed Richards, Mr. Fantastic, who is probably the best known hero with powers of elasticity. He has been able to use these powers to absorb or redirect the impacts of bullets or explosions, stretch his limbs to distances of 1,500 feet, and for shapeshifting, it's allowed him to do so many different things: entangling, imitating, parachuting, gliding, cushioning, slingshotting, bouncing. He can do all of it, being able to go as thin as a sheet of paper or as narrow as a needle, and even turning himself into a liquid solid state. But it goes even further. He could even mold himself to the shape of something like a key to unlock a door. Basically, this power has a lot of uses. And finally, in at number 1, Multiple Man. Multiple Man has such a crazy interesting power. Jimmy, or James Madrox, is actually a changeling, which is sort of a genetic precursor to Marvel's mutants, who gain their abilities at birth instead of having their X gene activated later on. For James, his power is that of duplication. He can duplicate himself multiple times upon impact, and each of his dupes can create one single dupe of their own. One of the real benefits of this power is that the Prime Madrox will retain any memories of his dupe's experiences. So, let's say you had to read like 10 books in a week. Well, you could have like 10 dupes all read one book each, or you could have like 20 dupes each read half a book. And then when they re-merge with you, you have all of their memories of each book that they just read. Multiple Man is like an information gathering powerhouse, but he can also use the ability to learn skills. Like, one of his dupes trained as a Shaolin monk and trained in meditation. One was trained as an EMT. One audited an autonomy class for like 6 months. One passed the New York bar exam, and one claimed to be the world's greatest detective. Stuff like that. In his self-titled comic from 2018, he even goes into a future world that is completely ruled by Magi, which is the plural for James's dupes. I'd love to see his potential shown in the MCU or something, but he's just kinda so underrated that I don't think it would happen.
Number 10. Jim Gordon. Jim Gordon ended up being recruited as a new Batman after the fallout of Endgame in the comics. Jim wasn't really in a great place to be commissioner, as he had just recovered from the effects of Joker venom, which had left him unhinged and violent, initially trying to kill his friend Batman. But at the same time, he was also still someone that the government and the police saw as being extremely useful. He had years of service under his belt, he knew Gotham like the back of his hand, and with Batman and Joker both believed to be dead, Gotham and its people were looking for a new man to take up the Batman mantle. Enter Jim Gordon. The government gave him training, muscle implants, and a new tech-based armor mech suit that also happened to have at least semi-sentience. Jim named the suit Rookie and would both wear and work alongside it, in tandem with the police and government as a new, weirdly svelte Batman. That suit was tight. Of course, you could argue that Jim wasn't great as Batman, considering when Bruce returned, he kinda had some messes to clean up. But as a Batman who worked with the law and had a more intimate understanding of the justice system, it could also be argued that Gordon, in his own way, was better. Number 9. Azrael. Depending on your opinion of how best to deal with criminals, there are some who think Azrael did a bang-up job as Batman and even would like to see him return to the mantle. Azrael ended up acting as Batman after Bruce Wayne had his back broken by Bane. Batman ends up leaving Jean-Paul Valley in charge while he works on healing up and recovering. At first, Azrael seemed like a pretty good replacement, but he quickly gets wrapped up in his mission to bring criminals to justice. Azrael is considered to be more brutal and violent than Batman, going so far as to even kill criminals who oppose him and not backing down when Bruce finally returns to take the Batman mantle back. Bruce even has to call in backup from his Robins to take down Azrael in the end. While Jean-Paul was definitely a different kind of Batman, he was a kind of different that some prefer. And friends, before we move on to our next spot, if you are loving this list and you want more seemingly impossible lists like this one, be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. Number 8. Damian Wayne. And if you like supers who are not afraid to kill, do I have a Batman for you. Damian Wayne in the alternate future that is Earth 666 ends up becoming Batman after the current Batman, Dick Grayson, is killed by exploding Jokerfish. With Grayson dead, Damian believes that the only way to fight against crime is to go to extremes, believing that killing is the only way. Needless to say, this stance creates a lot more problems for Gotham, and especially for Commissioner Barbara Gordon, who becomes kind of a sworn enemy to Batman. In the end, Damian as Batman does bring about the destruction of Gotham, and possibly the destruction of the world, but in a way, he was still super successful in what he set out to do. Damian created a bargain with the devil, trading his soul in exchange for becoming the eternal protector of Gotham, which is what happened. Of course, as with any wish or deal with the devil, there's always a twist. And in this case, the twist is that Gotham ends up being destroyed due to a nuclear strike. Still, Damian does protect Gotham till the very end of its existence. What more can you ask from Batman? Other than to, I guess not let Gotham be destroyed, which is a fair ask, I suppose. Number 7. Elliot Ness. Elliot Ness becomes the Batman in the Elseworld story Batman Scar the Bat from 1996. The reason why I think Elliot Ness makes a better Batman than Bruce Wayne? Well, because he's based on a real-world character who actually fought to stop criminals in Chicago during the Prohibition era. He was a special agent who was known for taking down Al Capone, with the help of his fellow law enforcement team, who were known as the Untouchables. In Scar of the Bat, we see Elliot Ness as a 1920s version of Batman, supposedly the one who inspired the character from the comics. Ooh, at least in this version of the story. When Elliot Ness finds he can't do enough within the limits of the law, he becomes a vigilante, taking up the mantle Batman because he fights crime sometimes with a bat. In turn, this weapon is chosen by Ness as Batman to scare criminals like Al Capone, who himself was known for beating those who betrayed him to death with a baseball bat. That's a scene that happens at the beginning of this comic. In the end, Elliot wins the day and hangs up the Batman mantle, allowing one of his colleagues who is on his deathbed to claim to have been Batman so as not to besmirch Ness's name and ensure that the criminals get booked the proper way. Basically avoiding any hearsay, because if you're a vigilante and you try to take someone for justice, people won't be like, but you're a criminal, so it's all thrown out. One of those things. After recounting the truth to his biographer years later, Elliot Ness seemingly dies in his sleep due to a heart failure at his kitchen table, which I believe is the actual way that Elliot Ness died in history. So yeah, I like stories where characters get to be heroes from history, because I like history. Number 6. Jace Fox, aka Timothy Call Me Jace Fox, the son of Lucius Fox and Tanya Fox and brother to Tiffany, Tam, and Luke Fox. This might be a hot take, but I would argue that Jace was a better Batman because he chose to step up to the plate at a time when Bruce Wayne basically couldn't be Batman. So at that time period, he was better since Bruce wasn't even Batman, but was instead the Dark Detective, having to operate, well, more in the dark, due to being a super wanted criminal. However, Jace saw the importance of the symbol of Batman and decided to take up the mantle in Bruce's place, despite the danger. He might not have as much experience as Batman, but he definitely comes with his own skill set and training backing him up. Jace's Batman in Future State also has access to future tech that current and past Bruce doesn't, because Future State. Number 5. Medusa. Honestly, I would say pretty much all of the Inhumans at this point of the Ultimate Universe are the coolest versions around, hence why I have so many of them on this list, or at least, one of the coolest versions of the Inhumans around. I would say the coolest though. I think they are the coolest. Medusa is no exception, possibly having my most favorite redesign when it comes to her character. The Medusa of Earth 1610 is still Black Bolt's queen, but seems to have been named for her familiarity and appearance to the Gorgon of Mythos. Medusa. This version of Medusa has snakes for hair. She also happens to be steadfastly loyal to her people. As I said before, we don't get to see too much of the Inhumans, but we do know that Medusa believes the Inhumans are basically superior to humans, and that distance should be maintained between their race and the humans in order to basically preserve their own culture and their own abilities. Medusa also expresses here that she has come to love her husband and accept him for who he is, despite the fact that he can never really show his love for her, at least not vocally. Which apparently is like a really big thorn in her side, because she seems to be very upset about it. She's like, Crystal, get over the fact that you don't want to hang out with us. Like, Black Bolt can't even talk to me, okay? If I can deal with that, you can deal with Maximus, okay? Let's just figure it out. Number 4. Hawkeye. Hawkeye actually has to be one of the coolest heroes in these comics, and no, I am not joking. The way they revamped this character was so impactful that the version of the character was a major influence on their MCU counterpart when it came time to pen down what that Hawkeye would be like. Clint Barton in the comics is known for being a hot mess typically, but in the Ultimate Universe, he was much more secretive, but also had a family. Tragically, his family ends up being found and killed in the process of enemy time he's trying to hunt him down. When he is captured and severely mistreated by said captors, what does he do? He doesn't hang his head, he doesn't give up, he escapes, using his fingernails, his freaking fingernails as weapons. It doesn't get more badass than that. This Hawkeye does not even need arrows to be a deadly threat. I don't often get to hype Hawkeye here on Top 10 Nerd, so I just want to say thank you Ultimate Universe for giving me an opportunity to do so, because I do like Clint Barton, but we don't often get to put him at the top of these lists, or near the top, so yay. Number 3, Miles Morales. I know this is kind of a hot take when it comes to Spider-Man. I know there's some people in the comments who are gonna be like, I think Peter Parker is the best version. And that's fine, that's fair enough. But I really love Miles Morales in this role. Now, we do also have a Peter Parker in the Ultimate Universe of 1610, but he doesn't really do much to stand out for me in comparison to his main continuity counterpart. And don't get me wrong, I do love Peter Parker, but Miles is kind of like a breath of fresh air in some ways in comparison to the age-old hero. Why? Well, Peter has a tendency to be like really hard on himself. And aside from that, he's surrounded by tragedy at times. Honestly, there are runs where it feels like every time Peter turns a corner, a new tragedy might just be awaiting him around that corner. Miles actually has a family still living, and while he did lose his mom in the Ultimate Universe, it never really felt like a constant, unresolved loss, like the death of Peter's Uncle Ben or his first love Gwen Stacy on Earth 616. And Rio, Miles' mom, is actually back now that the 1610 Miles has been permanently displaced, taking up residence in the 616 reality, and his family obviously is there with him. Miles also just has super cool powers. On top of much of what Peter has going on, Miles can also camouflage himself, and he has Venom Blast powers, so gotta give it to him. Sorry. Number 2, Gwen Stacy. Gwen Stacy is such an underrated character in the Marvel Ultimate Universe. On the Earth of 616, Gwen is, well, she's dead. Or she's probably dead. She might be showing up again soon, apparently, but it's probably a clone or a trick or something. I don't believe it's the original Gwen Stacy. She's been dead and gone for many years. I don't think she's ever really gonna come back. In the Ultimate Universe, Gwen also kinda dies, but also kinda doesn't. She's killed by Carnage, not an alien symbiote, but kind of a lab-made one in this reality, and in essence, her consciousness becomes merged with it, meaning that Carnage becomes Gwen, and Gwen becomes Carnage. So yeah, as freaky as that sounds, in the Ultimate reality, Gwen Stacy lives on as Carnage. It's freaky, and it's cool. Well, you might think this is the same as a clone Gwen in the 616 universe. It's not really. Because 1, she has the power of Carnage, and 2, she is an 100% exact biological duplicate who also possesses Gwen's mind up to the point of her death, which, not all Gwen clones in 616 have, allowing Gwen to continue to grow and develop as she would have as a human, but simply with superpowers. Well, she only has superpowers for a bit, sadly. She has them until Eddie Brock's Venom assimilates Carnage, leaving her devoid of the symbiote and her powers going forward. I kinda wish she had stayed as Carnage, but it's fine. When she was Carnage though, I think that was super cool. Even though I know it was freaking her out, I thought she could have maybe become the new Carnage. That would have been neat. Number 1, The Maker. The Maker is the alternate version of Reed Richards. I actually have always felt that Richards might make a better villain than a hero, and The Maker seems to have been this thought made manifest. Living proof. Well, fictional living proof. The Maker initially started out as a hero, leader of the team known as the Fantastic Four. However, in the Ultimate Universe, his and Sue's future of marital bliss was not as much guaranteed. And in fact, after the tragedy of Ultimatum and Sue Storm turning down his marriage proposal, Richards got a different perspective on life, which inevitably turned him into a villain. In this universe, Reed had a rough childhood, and part of where his villainy started was in turning on his family. A family that had mistreated him as he saw it for years. Yeah, in this reality, Reed commits patricide and matricide to get back at his parents. Very counter to his Earth 616 alternate, and that version's relationship with his family, which much better than this one. Number 10, Jessica Drew. Jessica Drew is very different from her 616 counterpart. Now, while I personally prefer the 616 Jessica Drew as she is one of my favorite spider people of all time, I can understand why others might find the ultimate version of the character more intriguing. This version of Jessica Drew is not her own person. Quite the opposite. She is in fact a female clone of Peter Parker. She shares Peter's memories and even his feelings, which means that she too cares for Mary Jane as Peter did. She was created to be used as a weapon by the CIA, but before they could wipe her mind to clear out all of Peter's memories, which she shared, she and the fellow clones who were created alongside her escaped. With all the other clones also sharing Peter's memories, Jessica attempted to dissuade them from interfering in Peter's life, but ultimately failed in this regard. In the end, she would team up with Spider-Man to help him try and find Mary Jane, who it turned out had been kidnapped by Kane, another of Peter's clones, whose ultimate self was also known as the imperfect or flawed clone, just as he is in 616. Number 9. Carol Danvers. Alas, this Carol Danvers doesn't have powers, like her 616 counterpart Captain Marvel, formerly known as Miss Marvel, does, but that doesn't make Carol any less awesome here. In fact, some would likely believe that the character actually might be improved without her cosmic abilities and her Kree heritage. This Carol Danvers is a high-ranking S.H.I.E.L.D. agent who would actually go on to become a replacement to the director of S.H.I.E.L.D., Nick Fury. To me, she embodies a lot of the military and tactical elements of Carol and possibly highlights those even more. Although sadly, she's not a pilot like Carol is on Earth 616. Carol would go on to lead the new Ultimates, and after her time with S.H.I.E.L.D. would actually become the chief of staff for the president, initially serving President Howard and afterwards greatly helping Steve Rogers, aka Captain America, when he became president thereafter. And friends, before we move on to the next spot, if you are loving our content here on Top 10 Nerd on YouTube, be sure to check us out over on Facebook, where we have lots of other content coming your way, and we're also gonna have lots of cool different stuff, so be sure to check it out. Number 8. Galactus. While Galactus is an iconic antagonist on Earth 616, the unique take on the often supervillain and supremely powerful cosmic being was a refreshing one. Here, Galactus was still a global threat, but as opposed to being a giant cosmically powered man who can sometimes, let's be honest, be reasoned with and defeated that way, this version of the villain was a group of deadly drones that were less easily reasoned with. After coming to the reality of Earth 616, this group of drones, which once threatened the Earth of the Ultimate Universe, threatened instead the whole universe of Earth 1610 when they met and merged with the Galactus of the main continuity. Galactus of Earth 616 decided to make the Galactus his heralds, resulting in a deadly combination. Number 7. The Liberators. The Liberators are basically a more politically inspired version of the Masters of Evil, a more serious take on that villainous group. They're made up from heroes of various international rival nations who basically seek to destroy the Ultimates because they feel the US has an unfair advantage and needs to be put in their place. The crazy part is that a lot of their beef feels pretty justified and serves to expose some of the flaws in American nationalism throughout the story involving them, despite those like Captain America and the Ultimates being the heroes of that story, while the Liberators are still technically very much the villains. Number 6. Green Goblin. While not everyone is as big a fan of this version of Green Goblin, I for one am a pretty big fan. In the Ultimate Universe, Norman Osborn more literally mutated into a Green Goblin, a giant hulking green figure who is seemingly unstoppable and even suggested to be immortal. Not only that, but this version of Osborn was directly tied to Spider-Man, as it was his own formula that granted Peter his spider-like powers and abilities. Maybe not for everyone, but I think that is pretty cool. And sure, this goblin wasn't stealthy in most cases in comparison to his 616 version, but he definitely comes across as more menacing and intimidating from a physical standpoint, at least.
Number 5. Count Vertigo. Count Werner Vertigo is of royal blood. He is heir to the throne of Vlatava. It's truly the most prestigious of titles, I swear to God. But that is not his superpower. Count Vertigo had a hereditary inner ear defect that affected his balance, which is also not a superpower. But Vertigo had a small electronic device implanted in his right temple that compensated that problem for him. Now, after tinkering with that device, Vertigo learned that he was able to affect other people's balance as well as fixing his own, distorting their perceptions so that they literally could not tell up from down, an effect known as vertigo. Werner used this skill most notably to fight Green Arrow, and that's honestly a pretty great hero to choose when you have this kind of power. He'd also join up with the Suicide Squad and checkmate, using his powers to make people dizzy to his advantage. Honestly, this power is much more effective than one might think, and it has been used by other characters in comicdom, most notably Marvel's, wait for it, Vertigo, who utilizes psionic equilibrium distortion. With this power, she is able to project swirling mental waves of psionic distortion into her environment that affect the nervous systems of other living beings, focusing on the organs of the inner ear, causing extreme vertigo, nausea, disorientation, and have them experience hallucinations. Her distortion waves can render others unconscious and can also interfere with the superhuman powers of others, preventing their use or causing them to function incorrectly. That's an elite power, and I think it would be just fun to do to people who annoy you, because that's what I would do. Number 4. Blink. You know, in the beginning of the X-Men Days of Future Past live action movie when there's that really cool fight scene in the bunker between some mutants and the ultra advanced Sentinels? Well, you know that mutant that was firing out portals and stuff, just like throwing them all over the place? That is Blink, and she is super cool. Clarice Ferguson's power has a few different uses. Obviously, there are bright pink portals, but she can also throw that same energy as a sort of missile that will teleport those, or even parts of those, that she hits. The range of her power is actually quite impressive, as it has a potential range of as far as the moon and back, which is freaking far. With the potential of her abilities and the cool way it's used, and even just how awesome she looks, you'd think she would have done a lot more, but she seems to not really have a whole lot of meaningful appearances, except if you want to see her being as amazing of a character as she should be, you can find her in the Age of Apocalypse, and she is so cool. Number 3. Groot. The Flora Colossi from Marvel Comics are a pretty unique alien species because they are all basically just humanoid trees, and because we only really know of one, Groot. As walking and talking trees, they can do a hell of a lot more than your average human or alien. One of Groot's greatest abilities is that he's been completely destroyed on 3 separate occasions in the comics and has been able to completely grow back from nothing but a twig. You think being made of wood, Groot is incredibly susceptible to fire, but nope. The wood-like organic material that makes up his body is not only resistant to fire, but is thick enough that it's resistant to almost all weapons too, giving him pretty impenetrable natural armor. But then, because Groot has control over his own vine-like body and can grow and shape himself for a whole variety of things. He can grow to become even larger than he already is, he can elongate his limbs to reach things or act as a bridge or a ladder, he can turn his limbs into weapons, even wooden blades that are somehow actually sharp, but he also somehow has super strength. But then on top of all of that, Groot also has the ability to control plants, heal others, and he's highly intelligent and has a tremendous grasp of quasi-dimensional superpositional engineering. So yeah, it would be really cool to be Groot. Number 2. Husk. Paige Guthrie is part of a family that has a lineage of mutant abilities. Sam Guthrie was Cannonball, Joshua Guthrie is Icarus, Melody Guthrie is Arrow, and Jebediah Guthrie, I don't remember his superhero name, but he has superpowers. Paige's power is a wee bit unorthodox though. She has the ability to shed her skin, and by concentrating on specific chemical or elemental formulas, she can cause the layer of skin underneath to be a different element or shape or state. She can become any solid that she has studied and can imitate metal, diamonds, granite, wood, rubber, and even glass. And somehow, I don't know how this works, she's been shown to turn into a sharp-toothed lizard one time. I don't know. She doesn't have perfect control over her abilities at this point in time, but when she transforms, she obviously gains different abilities depending what she turns into. She has granted herself super strength and durability, flame generation, and many other things. Her shedding lets her get rid of dirt or sweat and even minor injuries, which is both cool and kind of a little freaky. She has all kinds of potential if she is given the time to properly train her powers. And finally, in at number 1, it's pheromonal persuasion. Zebediah Killgrave, the Purple Man from Marvel Comics, has the ability to secrete pheromones that, once inhaled by another person, allows him to control them using literal verbal commands, making them completely obedient to him. This power essentially lets him use words to completely override the willpower of others. Now, while Killgrave used this power to commit quote normal crimes like robbing banks, also more predominantly would use his ability to manipulate those of the opposite gender to fulfill his own desires, which is both incredibly despicable but sadly probably pretty realistic. Luckily though, this is not a power that is unique to Killgrave. Other characters like DC's Poison Ivy, Crimson Fox, and Resurrection Man, or Marvel's Spider-Woman, Daken, and the other members of Purple Man's family all use variations of this power for all kinds of things. Most characters using the power use it for villainy, funny because, let's be honest, controlling others is pretty evil. A lot of the time though, it's used for romantic purposes, but it can be used to mark territory, to make people not want to enter certain spaces, as a way of leaving a trail for somebody to follow, to disorient others or throw others off one's trail, and to increase one's level of stealth. It's such an incredibly subtle ability and versatile ability, which makes it fly under the radar, but it's allowed some characters to reach super levels of power without much effort at all. In at number 10 is Lifeguard. Lifeguard, or Heather Cameron, arguably has one of the most useful mutant powers possible. Her ability is called Danger Detection Response, and basically what it means is that she can detect danger to her or others' lives in her vicinity, and she can literally evolve whatever powers are necessary for her to stop those lives from being lost. She can gain more than one power at a time and is able to control said power after just a few seconds. It also seems to be kind of limitless in what she can do. Her situation biomorphic adaptations have taken the form of growing wings for flight, extra arms for carrying, and super strength, her skin turning into a sort of golden metallic super awesome armor, gills for underwater breathing with her legs even turning into a fish tail for better swimming ability, as well as her simply upping her strength level from normal to superhuman. It's almost too fitting that she was an actual lifeguard before her powers emerged, because she's a literal lifesaver. Number 9, Mantis. Mantis actually got her start in comics when she used her abilities to reform Swordsman or Jacques Duquesne, which actually got her into the Avengers. Mantis's powers and abilities are more than what you may have gathered from her film counterpart. Mantis has complete control over her body, which in turn gives her peak human agility, the ability to accelerate healing through force of will, and an empathic nature enabling her to communicate telepathically with and sense the emotions of others as psychic vibrations. She can also control her heart and respiratory rate and blood flow. Her mastery of the Kotati priest's martial arts, which focuses on the manipulation of nerve endings and pressure points, has enabled her to knock out beings as powerful as Thor, and her telepathic and empathic abilities are improved upon thanks to the 2 antennae she has coming out of her head. Right here. She doesn't stop there though. Mantis also gained abilities when she merged with the Kotati, such as being able to communicate with both plants and animals and survive in space in a physically solid energy form. She can transfer herself from plant life to plant life across interstellar distances or dimensions, creating a new body from the plant life wherever she ends up. She can transmit and receive telepathic impressions, she has precognitive powers, and more recently she can fire powerful pyrokinetic energy blasts, form energy shields, communicate directly with cosmic beings like eternity and death, and completely control her personal energies as well as her physical form. All this to say, don't sleep on Mantis. Number 8, Sage. Sage is a super genius with a brain more powerful than any computer in the world, granting her perfect memory and rapid analytical abilities. She can come up with the perfect plan in an instant, learn just about any skill without having to practice, remember everything she's ever experienced, perform multiple tasks at once by allocating a partition of her brain to each task, and thanks to training with Professor X, she can engage in telepathy. Her telepathic abilities specifically allow her to detect minds and read them, project thoughts, astral projection, cast realistic mental illusions, and she even has a kind of psionic defense unique to her called her firewall. But it doesn't even stop there, as Sage even has some biokinetic abilities as well, including reading another mutant or person's genetic code and DNA, being able to literally see who someone's related to, jumpstarting latent or enhancing current mutant abilities, and has complete control over her physical body, being able to expel nanobots from her body by controlling her immune system, almost like highly advanced antivirus. She needs more time in the spotlight, just like Mantis. Number 7, the Living Swarm. Okay, so there are a few characters out there in comics who can turn into or are made up of things different from you and I. One of the more interesting of those things would be bugs. Characters like Marvel's Swarm, who is made up of a huge number of bees, or Spider-Man and Carl King, who are literally thousands of super spiders who take on the form of a human being. It may be the stuff of nightmares to a lot of us, but the ways in which this ability comes in handy are kind of incredible. Obviously, having a form that can split apart or move to take on different shapes is incredibly useful for getting into places you're not supposed to be, turning yourself into useful items, being basically intangible, or being able to terrify pretty much anyone. But for Carl King and Spider-Man specifically, their consciousness is actually spread throughout the swarm, allowing them to achieve a kind of rudimentary form of possibly immortality, as only one single spider needs to survive for the entire swarm to be remade and just carry on living. Swarm, being made up of thousands of bees, can even fly through the air, and his powers allow him to control other bees to add to his swarm and grow to bigger sizes. The only real issues would come in the form of bug spray and insecticides, but at that point you can't really do much, so there you go. Number 6, cartoon physics. This ability is definitely a unique one, and one not used too often, and for an understandable reason. It is basically unbeatable. Characters like Batmite and Mr. Mxyzptlk, Captain Carrot and the Zoo Crew from DC Comics, and Deadpool, Impossible Man, and Spider-Ham from Marvel Comics all have some kind of varying degree of this power, not to mention the completely insane character of the Mask. It's hard to explain exactly how this power works or what it even technically is. For someone like Spider-Ham, for example, he's able to become more cartoony the more danger he's in, which kind of lets him and others like him just take a hell of a lot more punishment without being hurt too badly. Characters like Batmite and Mr. Mxyzptlk actually just completely warp reality, usually in comical and cartoonish ways. Like I said, it's all hard to properly explain, but these characters can creatively turn almost anything into a weapon. They can eat an ungodly amount of anything, detach their body parts, spin like tornadoes, create traps and allies out of what looks like ink. They can deflate or inflate, they can manipulate the weather based on their emotions, talk to animals, be talking animals, have a great sense of humor, and almost always they break the fourth wall. Actually, being aware of the fact that the character is actually in a comic book is usually a good indication that they have some kind of cartoon physics abilities. And if you really think about it, this ability kind of gives these characters a kind of godhood in comic books. Number 5, Captain America. Time to get controversial. Alright, look, many people hate that the Ultimate Universe turned Captain America into a nationalist, someone who would cheat, and someone who could criticize France. That's not what 616 Captain America would do, it's true, but this ain't 616, this is 1610, and here, things are a little bit more realistic. Sorry. The guy who runs around with the stars and stripes being a bit of a jerk from time to time? Hardly the worst offense in this world. The writers may have cleverly tried to embed the mindset of a common white man of his era and time, and I think they achieved that, even if fans hated it. This version of Captain America, while also being a bit of a jerk, is actually superhuman, as opposed to being just a peak level human being, which has him perform some pretty awesome feats. This power boost mixed with the fact that he is very willing to cheat and bend the rules to get the job done, he is a powerful character and should be as feared as he is respected. Maybe he isn't better in terms of morals or being a great guy, but he's what a real Cap would probably be like in my cynical brain, and in terms of sheer strength and power, I think he most definitely is better. Number 4, Mr. Sinister. Look, his Ultimate Universe version may not have the wow factor that his 616 self might, but in the Ultimate X-Men arc, the Tempest, the sorta goofy looking Victorian geneticist in a Liberace collar, Mr. Sinister, is reimagined as a schizophrenic street thug with a white tank top, weird tattoos, and a hat. And he's gunning down mutants to please his Lord Apocalypse, who isn't actually real and is actually an effigy Sinister has constructed out of trash. 4 issues of the X-Men chasing down a delusional mutant murderer were some of the best from the X-Men extended run in the Ultimate Universe, in my opinion. Number 3, Magneto. The Ultimate Universe Magneto moves backwards away from the anti-hero crafted by Chris Claremont and back towards a return to the genocidal, aspiring dictator originally written by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. And I'd say that he gets there quite successfully. In the first volume of Ultimate X-Men, Magneto attacks Washington DC with reprogrammed Sentinels, massacring civilians while having President George W. Bush stripped to nothingness groveling at his feet. He is utterly insane and completely terrifying, which could be seen as a negative by fans of his anti-hero persona, or, if you're like me, it's a giant win for a villain to be truly hateable and terrifying. Either way, this comes to its head in the divisive Ultimatum, where Magneto drowns New York City and kills dozens of heroes, including his old friend Professor X, when he reverses the polarity of the Earth in an insane show of power that sets the Ultimatum wave loose on the world. Number 2. Red Skull. In the Ultimate Universe, Steve Rogers and a girlfriend at the time, Gail Richards, shared a night together in 1945 before he went and got himself popsicled. 9 months later, out popped a baby that the government decided needed to be kept a secret. They took the boy into foster care on a military base, training him to become a super soldier to replace his father. He soon became stronger and more tactically skillful than Captain America, even though he seemed to be a perfect soldier. Rogers' son had been carefully planning his escape. Fast forward to 1963 when he was finally at the age of 17. The son went off the handle, de-lifing all the doctors and soldiers at the facility. He also used the kitchen knife to carve the skin from his head, officially and literally becoming the Red Skull. In rebellion against the system that created him, Red Skull was the one who planned President John F. Kennedy's send-off to the grave. He becomes a mentally unstable assassin and tries to eventually steal Reed Richards' plans for the Cosmic Cube in order to use it to change history so he could grow up with his father. It's just a way better backstory for a Red Skull, in my opinion. And at number 1, it is Peter Parker. For a lot of people, Brian Michael Bendis' legendary Ultimate Spider-Man run, the one that kicked off the whole Ultimate Universe, is among the best of the best Spider-Man runs ever. Peter Parker is a modern day 15-year-old, still trying to balance his life as a teenager and his life as a superhero. What's different from this version when compared to the Amazing Spider-Man is that Peter Parker's life is much more relatable and digestible for anyone born in the past 25 years. For starters, Peter isn't a photographer when he first starts at the Daily Bugle. Being a tech-savvy teenager, our hero is one of the Daily Bugle's top web designers. J. Jonah Jameson also isn't a bumbling buffoon. He's a battle-tested, competent newspaper editor that's well aware of how to handle his staff. Spider-Man's interactions with other heroes are a bit more grounded in Ultimate Spider-Man, as well as his love life being much more entertaining and realistic. Whether it's Kitty Pryde or Mary Jane Watson, Peter Parker's love life never has a dull moment. Even Spider-Man's physical appearance makes more sense. Peter Parker has the build of a realistic nerdy teenager, and the costume's huge bug-eyed lenses make for the perfect representation of a youthful hero. And we haven't even mentioned his humor yet! One of the best scenes in any Spidey comic comes when Ultimate Spider-Man's version of the hero goes toe-to-toe with the Kingpin for the first time. During the battle, old Webhead pulls out note cards filled with fat jokes mocking Wilson Fisk's size. Like, come on, it's great.